It's officially game day, and the Seahawks and Lions will be duking it out on Monday Night Football with even more injuries than expected. We're going to take one last look at the lengthy injury reports and how that could end up impacting this primetime matchup. Coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on a rare Monday pregame show by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it, whether you're tuning in from Aberdeen, Washington, or Branson, Missouri. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. As we gear up for the first Monday night game for the Seahawks here in the 2024 season, primetime national audience. Unfortunately, Rob, the Seahawks and the Lions, they're both pretty darn beat up for it only being week 4. And we've talked ad nauseum about the defensive line injuries that the Seahawks have, but this really was a nightmare scenario for Mike Macdonald and company. I know he's not going to say that in a press conference, but going into a game against one of the top 5 rushing teams in the NFL without Boye Mafe, Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, or Geno Smith, that is a starting defensive line for a Pro Bowl team potentially, and you are not going to have any of those 4 players available on the road at Ford Field. That's obviously the big storyline, but the Lions are going to be missing some really darn good players as well.
They absolutely are. And I think that where you have to start the conversation is a player that we had talked about before at the center position. The Lions are not going to have their Pro Bowler Frank Ragnow. That is going to move their starting left guard, Graham Glasgow, to the center position. And it's going to be pushing up a left guard that doesn't have a lot of experience Coyote Ayosika, who was a former offensive tackle, undrafted free agent that has had to kind of work his way up into the NFL. It does look reassuring that their star tight end Sam Laporta is likely to be available, the linebacker Alec Anzalone. But you mentioned Brian Branch, Corbin, the safety that popped up on Sunday's injury report after being a full participant on Friday and Saturday. He is not he's listed technically as doubtful for this game with an illness. If Brian Branch is not available for the Detroit Lions, that could be the nightmare scenario similar to the Seahawks having some holes along the defensive line, just because of the fact we know how good that Geno Smith has been inside. We know how talented Seattle's pass catchers are, specific at the wide receiver position, but we talked before about tight ends as well. If Brian Branch, one of the better coverage safeties in all of the NFL, is not available to the Detroit Lions, if this does become a little bit of a track meet type of a game, the way that several of the recent Seahawks and Lions games have been, then it does significantly impact the Lions' ability to cover Seattle's pass catchers.
It's been quite a week for Brian Branch because he suffered a concussion in the last game against the Arizona Cardinals. He goes through concussion protocol, and by Friday, he's full participant. He passed through the protocols in flying colors, and then we get to Sunday, and now he's got an illness, and he's listed as doubtful. So again, we have seen players that have been listed as doubtful play before. Maybe Brian Branch is thinking this will be his Michael Jordan game, but right now it is not looking good for him to play. And I don't know that there has been a safety in the NFL in coverage that has been better than Brian Branch in the first 3 weeks of the season. He's got an interception. He leads the league with 5 pass breakups, so he's been getting his hands on the football constantly. And this is a guy that has played at least 45 snaps in the slot, at free safety and strong safety this year. Detroit moves him everywhere. If you do not have him in this game, look, those kind of players are really hard to find. Brandon Joseph, formerly of Northwestern and Notre Dame, played his last season at Notre Dame. He would be in line for his first career start. And Rob, you and I both have scouted Brandon Joseph. I got a chance to watch him in person when he's playing at Notre Dame. Good college player. but he is not the athlete or the versatile player that Brian Branch is. The Lions are not going to be able to do a lot of the same stuff that they do with Brian Branch. They're going to have to figure out how schematically to offset that, because he is more of a strong safety, in my opinion. You can play him at the free safety spot, but he is not the most explosive athlete. This is a guy that did not test well at the combine a couple years ago. He has suited up and played in 5 games in his first 2 years too. So he is not only never started in the NFL, he's a guy that has not had much experience in general. That would be a huge blow to Detroit's defense. And I think Aaron Glenn would have to make some significant adjustments to how he wants to run things schematically again, because Brandon Joseph, fine player, he is not going to be able to do a lot of those things that Brian Branch does. So you consider the fact that Detroit's got 3 brand new corners that are starting. They have been able to be successful the first 3 weeks. And I think a big part of that, Brian Branch being that leader back there, a young leader that's really evolving into one of the best safeties in football, not having him out there with those 3 new corners, that potentially could be a game changer, just like the defensive line injuries are for the Seahawks going into this game. And you have to believe this late in the process that Seattle is now looking at, okay, what can we do to modify our game plan a little bit to try to take advantage of this if Brian Branch is not out there? It's that big of a loss for Detroit.
No, it really is. You mentioned Brandon Joseph, who is a former undrafted free agent, as you said, played his final year at Notre Dame. Previously was at Northwestern, where he had an awful lot of interceptions early in his career, and that led to him being a big name player. But then, the 6 foot, 200-pounder ran a 4.62 at the combine, wound up not getting drafted. The other backup safety that the Lions have is another former undrafted free agent by the name of Lauren Strickland. He's 5'9", 200 pounds. And so he's built a little bit more like a nickel cornerback. And so, as you said, Brian Branch is an incredibly versatile player for the Lions. And so if he is unavailable, then I do think that the Lions are going to try to stick with their primary 3 corners. We talked about this before. The veterans, Carlton Davis, who was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers before, their first-round selection, Terrion Arnold, and then a good football player, but a very limited one in terms of size, in Amik Robertson, who's all of 5'7". Again, if that's the 3 that you are leaning on, and you have 2 former undrafted free agents as the backup to Brian Branch in the deep middle, then that is going to create some problems for the Detroit Lions defensively matching up against the Seahawks. So again, that is going to be a matchup I think that the Seahawks are definitely going to try to exploit. It just remains to be seen if Brian Branch, as you said, is going to have a Michael Jordan, Walter Reed type of heroic performance where he is going to suit up given the bright lights and everything that is on the line here, albeit an early NFL matchup, but one that obviously has some potential playoff ramifications if the Lions and Seahawks continue to play at the level that we've seen over the first month of the season.
It's interesting because Mike Macdonald even admitted on Saturday that the fact that it's early in the season and that they have 2 games coming up, they have 3 games in 10 days, starting with this game on Monday night, that those factors weighed into the decision with some of the injured players not playing for the Seahawks in this game. So even though it's a really important game, look, it's week 4. We don't want to get one of these guys hurt worse. When we have 3 games in 10 days, we want to have those guys available when we play 2 and 5, cut up against the Giants, and of course that huge game against the 49ers. So there's a lot of things that are at play here. Detroit does not have that same situation where they're going to be playing that many games, but at the same time, the Lions are still in week 4 themselves, so they're going to be, erring on the side of caution with guys. We'll see what happens with Brian Branch, but if he is not playing, you got to believe that Geno Smith is thinking, all right, this is a great opportunity for me, because that is a linchpin in this secondary. And if you don't have him out there for the leadership, the Swiss Army knife capabilities, the ball hawking that he brings, he's a pretty good tackler too for the most part. You don't have him out there, that is a massive loss. So we'll have to see if he ends up suiting up tonight for the Lions, but right now trending towards not playing. That might be the type of situation that ends up playing into Seattle. Really, this becomes a battle of attrition. Who's able to take advantage of the injuries the most? Can the Lions get their run game going, or can the Seahawks say, oh, Brian Branch is out of there, now let's open up the skies a little bit and let's take advantage of this new cornerback group without Brian Branch behind them? So really it's going to boil down to who can take advantage of their advantages in this football game with the injuries that both teams are dealing with. When we come back, yesterday I had a chance to dive into the defensive line situation for Seattle a little bit. Rob and I are going to take an even deeper dive at the players that are going to be needed to step up against Detroit tonight at Ford Field. A lot of maybe unfamiliar faces that are going to be stepping into significant roles for the Seahawks. We'll be visiting that coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping a mortgage payment when you want to buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, and comedy near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat. With their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You want to see the Seahawks in their third home game next weekend on Sunday against the New York Giants at Lumen Field. You can get seats in one of the loudest venues in the NFL in the lower 90. Great seats to see an ascending young team that, at least at this point of recording, has yet to lose a game. Game Time has deals on tickets right of the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download a Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to the pregame Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined here for today's special Monday show by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s listening. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The new Locked On NFL is here twice a day, 2 shows a day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicking things off in the morning with a double shot of NFL Espresso. And then the barber himself, Tony Wiggins, for the second show for some real NFL talk. Add in the local Locked On experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make the madman Tyler Rowland and the barber Tony Wiggins your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. The Seahawks will be looking to move to 4-0 for just the second time in franchise history tonight when they face off against the Detroit Lions. Monday Night Football at Ford Field. Obviously, as we just mentioned, both teams are coming in a little bit as wounded ducks into this game. Some significant injuries for both teams. And really, it's interesting in the sense that it feels like both teams are going to have different positional groups or areas of their team that are going to be impacted most. Seattle, it is clearly the defensive line, Rob. And here's the thing. We were touting the depth on this defensive line as early as April. And then the draft came and gone, and Byron Murphy II's added to this group. We've talked so much about the depth, and there's been additions that have been made since then. We're going to find out just how deep this football team is in the trenches without Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy II, Boye Mafe, Uchenna Nwosu, all 4 of those players being ruled out on Friday. None of them going to suit up tonight. That is going to put the onus on a lot of unheralded players to step up in this football game for the Seahawks.
Yeah, and that's really where I think that this matchup is absolutely going to hinge on. Look, we know the superstars for both squads, but it is going to be a test of attrition, a test of depth, and that is somewhere where I think that Seattle has some significant advantages over the Lions, and I think most NFL teams. Corbin, I'm excited. Basically, the same way that Mike Macdonald described it, is just the excitement about who is going to get their opportunities rather than bemoaning the fact that you are going to be missing some of the more recognizable players. Let's just kind of start off here in the middle at the defensive tackle position, where, as you mentioned, the Seahawks are going to be without their first round pick and Byron Murphy II, as well as Leonard Williams. So when you look at Leonard Williams, Big Cat, who's appropriately named considering his agility and the fact that he is as large as he is, 6'5", 300 pounds roughly. The Seahawks have a similarly built, not quite as athletic, but similarly built player in Mike Morris, 6'6", 295 pounds, has the length to be able to kind of hold up as a run stuffer. And of course, that's going to be the primary focus against this run-heavy Detroit Lions offense. I think that there's a possibility you're going to see Myles Adams jump back in to Seattle's active players. He, of course, was a healthy scratch a week ago against the Miami Dolphins, but that was when they had Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy healthy and raring to go. So I think that you might see if the Seahawks feel that there is a game, that this is a game that again is going to have a lot of points scored, then you're going to have to get some pressure on Jared Goff. And I think that Myles Adams has the frame at roughly 6 foot and 285, 290 pounds to be able to kind of get some wiggle in the middle. If they do believe that it's going to be much more of a run heavy game, then maybe it's Matt Gotel, Quentin Bohanna, one of those big guys. It's a little bit more of a classic run stuffing nose guard, similar to John Hankins in the middle there. So that to me is the primary focus that you have to kind of at least start off with, but certainly on the outside as well. No Uchenna Nwosu, no Boye Mafe. And so, again, it's going to be a test of Seattle's depth. We know that Derek Hall has taken just a magical ascent so far this season. I want to see what Draymond Jones is able to do. He's got a couple of tackles for loss already, a sack, a forced fumble already. He is going to be very much on the forefront of this game plan. And then Trevis Gibson is another one I'm excited about. Very different size. He's 6'4", 260 pounds. Draymond Hall, 6'3", 281, shorter, stockier. Can Seattle hold up in the interior as well on the perimeter against Detroit's run game? That might be the game in a nutshell.
I do like the fact that you're pointing out a lot of these size metrics, because it does feel like the Seahawks have done a good job of putting insurance policies on the roster that can handle similar roles. I mean, you're not going to be having a player of Leonard Williams' caliber backing up Leonard Williams. That's just not going to be happening. But Mike Morris does have the size specs at 6'5", 6'6", 300 pounds. He's got the length. He has played for Mike Macdonald previously at Michigan, so he knows the scheme inside and out. He's a guy that can play off the edge. He can play that big end. He can play in a two-point stance. He's moved around the line. So a lot of the schematic stuff you're still going to be able to do. There's obviously some athletic limitations compared to Leonard Williams, but Mike Morris is a player they've been very excited about. And then Myles Adams. To me, Myles Adams is the X factor in this game because he's been a healthy scratch largely because of a numbers game. The Seahawks like him. Mike Macdonald likes him. There just hasn't been a spot for him with the roster limitations you have weekly. That is not going to be the case in this game. And look, he is not Byron Murphy II in terms of athleticism. There's very few guys that size that are in that athletic stratosphere. But Myles Adams is a really athletic cat in his own right. And this is a guy that's played 3-tech. He's actually played a little bit of undersized nose and held up pretty well. A couple years ago, it's against the Jets, had some really good plays in there because he's short and stocky. He can actually hold up fairly well in that regard. So he may be able to do a lot of the same roles that Byron Murphy II's been playing. Again, he's not the same caliber player, but he's looked good when he's had his limited opportunities. This could be the chance for him to really get some snaps and show what he can do. He's been with the organization now for 3+ years. This is that opportunity that he's been waiting for more snaps. So it feels like both those guys, they're not the same players, the ones they're replacing, but they can do a lot of the same things. So it's not going to limit you schematically, at least. You're going to be able to do a lot of stuff. Off the edge, the player that I'm excited about is somebody that's played a lot of snaps for Mike Macdonald. He got some action last week, had a couple promising rushes. Tyus Bowser. I expect Tyus Bowser and either Quentin Bohanna or Matt Gotel are going to be the two practice squad elevations for this game. We should find that out actually as soon as possible. They have up until the game to be able to make these declarations, but I would think that these declarations are going to be made here pretty shortly. But I would think those are going to be the guys that are going to be elevated. Tyus Bowser is a guy that knows this system. He has played for Mike Macdonald for a long time, even before Macdonald was a defensive coordinator and he was the linebacker coach. He worked with Tyus Bowser then. And this is a guy that's been through a lot to get back to this point, but he is a viable NFL rusher. He can drop back. He can do all the things that you need. I think he is the one. Maybe not even Trevis Gibson. I would say that Tyus Bowser is the one that I'm most curious to see how he plays in this game. he's also played against the Detroit Lions a few times. So I'm really excited to see what Tyus Bowser can do, because to me, that's the guy that fills the Boye Mafe role here. Derek Hall and Draymond Jones are going to be the ones starting, and then you can mix Gibson in behind Draymond Jones. I think he has more of a similar skill set to Draymond than the other way around, whereas Derek Hall, you can go to Tyus Bowser, and you got another guy that's kind of a twitchy edge rusher. So they've certainly got some pieces that they can work with here. There's a lot of teams that would be in a worse position with this injury conundrum what the Seahawks are. That does not make this any less scary going into this game, but it at least gives you a little more optimism that you may be able to withstand some of these losses because of the depth that you've built, not only in your active roster, but also the practice squad.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you mentioned Tyus Bowser, because he is a good football player who obviously does have a great deal of familiarity with Mike Macdonald's system, previously playing for him in Baltimore. And Gibson is another player that I mentioned before, and part of it was because of his familiarity with that Detroit Lions offense. Of course, Travis Gibson previously played with the Chicago Bears, an NFC North foe of Detroit. Gibson has a little bit more twitch to him in the pass, is a pass rusher. Now, I know he doesn't have the statistics to back that up. He has 0 tackles through the first 3 games of the season. He played a lot of ball, however, in the game that I think that the Seahawks have played so far that most matches up to this one, considering the fact that it was on the road and it was against a run-heavy opponent, and that was New England Patriots a couple of weeks ago. Travis Gibson's length and power are one of the reasons why I do think that he has the ability to kind of hold up at the point of attack. Same thing with Draymond Jones as well, who had a pretty splashy performance against the New England Patriots, again, a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned them, however, just knowing that the New England Patriots, look, Vidarian Lowe and Mike Onwenu, who the Patriots have the left and right tackle positions respectively. Look, these are former 6th round selections, whereas the Detroit Lions, of course, have 2 former 1st round picks, at the left and right tackle positions in Taylor Decker and, in my opinion, the best offensive lineman in football in Penei Sewell. So again, this is a significant matchup that I think that the Seahawks, because of their depth, have a fighting chance. But there's no question about it. They are going into quite literally the lion's den here against the tackle talent that Detroit has on the field.
When we come back, we've already done the game planning for this game, but it's time to look at some areas of advantage. Where can the Seahawks play to their strengths against this Lions opponent tonight to give themselves a chance at a 4th straight victory? We'll be breaking it all down coming up next year on our Monday pregame edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. On the same page where you place your bets, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring a touchdown against the Lions in Monday Night Football to Noah Fant being the first player in Monday's game with a 30-plus yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Monday pregame edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks looking to stay among the few undefeated Monday Night Football against the Detroit Lions at Ford Field. Both teams coming in with plenty of injuries, but plenty of talent still going to be on the field for both squads. Rob, we've already had a chance to dive into the game plan, what the Seahawks need to do on offense and defense. It's time to take a deeper dive, though, into areas of advantage, because this does feel like a game with all the pieces that are missing for both teams. There's going to be a lot of backups that are going to be getting starting reps in this game. It changes things up a little bit, but you've still got the evidence from the first 3 weeks to work with as well. So we're going to be looking at areas of strength, where the Seahawks can play to their strengths in this game, what bodes well for them to get that victory. And I know a lot of people are looking at this game with despair because of the defensive line, and I get it. Those injuries, you can't sugarcoat that. That is a tough thing to overcome against a physical Lions team. But, Rob, there's some advantages the Seahawks undoubtedly have, and I think we got to start with Geno Smith under center. And it's not just the fact that it's been dome, sweet dome for him at Ford Field. You also have to add in the fact that he has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at beating man coverage, 73.5% completion rate this year. Only C.J. Stroud of the Texans has a higher completion rate against man coverage. He has been dynamic with his receivers when teams have tried to man them up. The Detroit Lions are second in the NFL at a 46% man coverage rate. Almost 50% of the time they are running man coverage. Aaron Glenn has always been an advocate of man coverage. He might want to think twice about that, though, if Brian Branch is not playing in this game to go with it. With the weapons that the Seahawks have, this feels like something that could be a huge benefit to the Seattle Seahawks if the Lions stick with status quo here because of the receivers they have and just the fact that Geno Smith has been so good playing against man coverage. If they are able to get the ball rolling with their passing attack, getting their guys on the outside separated against Detroit's corners, this has a chance to be a game where they can put some points on the board.
And they absolutely should be able to put some points on the board if they can slow down, of course, Aiden Hutchinson, the key to success for Seattle, at least on the offensive side of the ball. But yes, I mean, considering the struggles that the Lions have had at the cornerback position, both they have some guys, as I mentioned before, they're starting nickel cornerback, and Meek Robinson is 5'7", and Carlton Davis, who was signed from the Buccaneers, has struggled so far in man coverage so far this season. You mentioned the 73% rate that Geno Smith has against man coverage. That's about the completion percentage that Carlton Davis has been allowing so far this season. And of course, he has not played against anybody as explosive as DK Metcalf. So I do think that is a significant advantage for the Seahawks on offense. I would argue on defense. Look, I have a great deal of respect for Jameson Williams and for Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. But I think that Seattle's cornerback play has been spectacular. We started the season, of course, just giddy with the expectations for Devin Witherspoon in particular. But I think with the way that Tariq Woolen has played so far this season, really has been one of the most promising signs of the Seahawks being able to potentially make a big time playoff run. And Jared Goff, very different than Geno Smith, has struggled a little bit in terms of turning the football over, especially against man coverage. And for linebackers and safeties, blitzes, and then defensive linemen dropping back into coverage, Jared Goff, for a veteran quarterback, has looked confused at times this season. So again, I know that on paper it's woe are the Seahawks as far as the defensive line, but I do think their depth and just the higher end talent that they have at receiver and corner, I think is a significant advantage for Seattle in this game.
I'm glad you pointed out the blitz aspect because, look, this is not something Mike Macdonald has done much. They're under 19% for blitzing this year. He hasn't had to because that front line has been so effective. Now, this game, you're missing so many guys up front that it may be difficult to come close to replicating that, especially against a really good Detroit offensive line, albeit without Frank Ragnow. They've still got some absolute studs on that front line. But I look at Jared Goff the last 3 games, and honestly, this has been a career-wide thing. As great as he has played for Detroit the last couple of years, particularly when they've had the run game going and the play action, that is key for Detroit. But for being a quarterback that has played so many snaps and started so many games, this is a guy that can be tricked by blitzes and sim pressures, and it has not been something the Seahawks have done a lot of. But this feels like a game. I mean, Jared Goff's the only quarterback in the league with more than 1 interception against the blitz this year. He's thrown 3. He's made some really questionable decisions, and Seattle's personnel plays well into that because obviously Devin Witherspoon, his ability to blitz, what he does coming from the slot position causes problems for opponents. But you've got Julian Love and Rayshon Jenkins who can both blitz. Both the linebackers, even if Tyrese Knight is starting instead of Jerome Baker, who's questionable playing this game. If Tyrese Knight's starting for a second straight week, Tyrese Knight was an excellent blitzer at UTEP, and he can get downhill. Seattle has all the pieces to be able to mix and match these blitz and sim pressure looks and keep Jared Goff off balance, which to this point, that has been key for defenses against Detroit. So I think this is a game that we could see that toolbox be opened up because Mike Macdonald did it last year in Baltimore too when they whipped the Lions in that game, albeit at Baltimore. The Ravens blitzed more in that game than they did most of their other games in the season. So I'm expecting a similar game plan. Maybe not exactly the same, but I'm expecting a more aggressive game plan, mixing and matching where those pressures are coming from to try to trick Jared Goff into making some bad decisions, which he has already done to this point. One last advantage to me the Seahawks have in this game is the return to Ken Walker III in the backfield. This is a Lions defense that right now ranks 20th in run stop win rate, according to ESPN. They're in the bottom third of the league. They have had their share of issues, and now you add in Marcus Davenport being out for the season at the other edge spot. It feels like you have an advantage there to be able to run the football. Your offensive line, for the most part, is going to be full strength going into this game. The Lions are missing some pieces up front. This has been a team that's got some linebacker injuries as well. Take advantage of that, getting the run game going. And what does that also do? It keeps Jared Goff and that offense on the sideline when you are able to get some longer possessions with the run game. I think the Seahawks with Ken Walker III's juice, he had a good game last year at Ford Field. If they can get him going and take advantage of some of those injuries the Lions have in their front seven, open up the play action a little bit more for Geno Smith to take advantage of Brian Branch being out. To me, it's a domino effect that comes off that run game. I have confidence that the Seahawks are going to be able to run the ball, and they're going to need to tonight to take some pressure off that injury-battered defense.
Yeah, and I think that there might be some Seahawks fans out there that when we mention Kenneth Walker III, I mean, obviously that is a huge advantage. You have, your most explosive playmaker back on the field. Well, I'm going to get even more obvious on you. As I mentioned before, the key here for Seattle from an offensive perspective is just making sure that you slow down Aiden Hutchinson in some way. So, again, the obvious aspect of it, I think that when you have a veteran quarterback like a Geno Smith, you have an offensive line that is expected to be starting the same guys, or perhaps it's going to be Christian Haynes at the right guard position. But my point is that you're relatively healthy up front. Then you should be able to get more multiple. You should be able to allow your quarterback, Geno Smith, to come up to the line of scrimmage, just simply identify where number 97 is and run the opposite way from him. And a big part of it is because the Lions do not have former first-round selection Marcus Davenport at the defensive end spot opposite Aiden Hutchinson. They've got a solid player, a former second-round pick in Josh Pascal from Kentucky, but he has not ascended to the point that the Lions were expecting. And at the linebacker position right behind him, arguably the Lions' best all-around linebacker, Derek Barnes, is also out. And now you've got Malcolm Rodriguez, who is a good instinctive player. Reminds me a little bit of former Seahawks Cody Barton, and that he'll get to the right spot eventually. And that's the thing, is the Seahawks need to take advantage of that. So I do expect Seattle to use Kenneth Walker as well as Zach Charbonnet as much as possible. Again, running away from Aiden Hutchinson, running towards players like a Josh Pascal and a Malcolm Rodriguez at the linebacker position, and quite possibly whoever winds up being the starting safety if Brian Branch is out as well.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to ensure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, Tell the Truth Tuesday is going to take on new meaning in the post-game Monday Night Football. We got this big contest coming up tonight. Rob and I will be breaking everything down in depth after revisiting the game. Make sure that you are listening in. Enjoy the contest tonight. Go Hawks.